Quick question, Elizabeth. In that last scene, isn't one of the women, isn't she black?
Yeah, one of them is.
Yeah, but then from
She-
the top, you
she's
can't see it
biracial.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you for the talk. I don't watch The Handmaid's Tale. One of the reasons is I tend not to watch post-apocalyptic shows like Was There Something Dead?
Like them, all of them?
Yeah, because one of the premises of most of these narratives is that if there is a world catastrophe, there will be no more racism, homophobia, or even sexism. Not in this one, obviously. And I'm just not interested. And this has been something I noticed years ago, and so what I'm interested in is just delete it from the narrative. And there's representation, but there's no, right? I mean, people they're there, but and especially since I think it's if there were an apocalypse, I think racism would probably rise. There was racism in the concentration camps, so I mean not racial, but within the Jewish communities, there was racism between different Jewish communities, as far as I know from people in my family who told me the stories. So like that to me is more interesting than showing the opposite.
I think I end up with all of those narratives because I'm unnaturally attracted to gross shows. I think that's part of it. But yeah, it is interesting how in some, it kind of depends on which post-apocalypse you're looking at. But in something like The Walking Dead, there's this attempt towards representation. But often characters of color, especially women of color, end up in this kind of badass role.
Yeah, superhuman strength.
Again, in this community building never seems to be at the heart of, and maybe because that wouldn't make for exciting television. But yeah, I think you do see this kind of resurgence, especially of patriarchy, and in some cases of racism. And you're right, it's absolutely true. I mean, we were talking about this earlier with the coronavirus. Code Switch just put out an episode about how increased racism against Asian Americans is happening now, today, because of the coronavirus, whereas, the Italian community in the US is completely unharmed.
About the Handmaid's Tale, I was wondering if you were familiar with the 1990 film adaptation, in which, yes, it's not a good adaptation at all, but it's interesting because right at the beginning you see black people being deported, and that's the end of it. After that, you don't see any black character or anything, and so I thought that this was a different take on black characters and on racial issues in.
Yeah, what's interesting, the 90 film is so bad. It's almost worth watching just because it's such crap. And Robert Duvall famously said, "Oh, well, I think it's a love story. I never really read the book." And you're just that's sort of all you need to know. But the thing that's so heartbreaking about the series, The Handmaid's Tale, is they've thought about this. There's a certain intentionality. They made that, and initially Margaret Atwood wasn't very excited about the idea of not maintaining the vision that she'd had in the novel, because she said that's not the way a theocracy would work. Of course they'd still be racist. But they haven't really taken it very far. And I haven't checked this myself, but one of the journalists that I read said something about, it's clear proof, obviously this is happening. There are no writers of color in the room for The Handmaid's Tale. And I don't know if that's still true for season 3, but it was for 1 and 2. I mean, getting back to your point of you need different points of view in the room if you're going to have different points of view on screen.
Okay, I have a question for Sonia. Brenda Weber was supposed to be here tomorrow, but she'd actually be here electronically speaking, thanks to Skype. Right. Because of the virus. Her university wouldn't let her come. And she is a great specialist in reality television, and within reality television in particular, makeover television. Okay. And it's funny because I was waiting for you to use this word all the time, and you use transformation, which is what we're talking about. Yeah. But makeover because especially when considering the kind of material you had, isn't it what we're talking about basically white men making over
Of course.
women?
I was supposed to mention this word when talking about our blushing brides, but I didn't have the time. But yes, of course, consumption here is expressed through the makeover principles, actually. And it's a quite common point between all of these movies, because even in the recent films, in Miss Congeniality, for example, it's a man who ensured the makeover of the female actress, as well as in Star is Born and with Bryce Hollywood. So it's a really a common point in these different movies. But the idea of makeover is kind of related to the binary representation of the consumption within this movie. So we have like a sort of a non-permanent consumption, display of consumption in the film, and a permanent one. And when the consumption disappears, and it coincides in, I mean, it's at the same time when the marriage is ended, the makeover is just dismissed. I mean, we are not talking about a makeover. It's just the end of the makeover and the end of the transformation. But it was, yes, it's a term that should have been mentioned.
Kind of following from this idea of transformation, you have the superficial level, which you've discussed in quite a lot of depth. I noticed in one of the clips you have a range of accents and languages as well. There's a lady who speaks in French, and a couple of the ladies who I thought spoke with quite English accents. Do you think that has a role to play as well in this transformation? Is there...
Well, in the movies, actually, being a high woman dame, as they express it, relates to the fact of kind of speaking like a French lady. So I suppose that the French high society dame is a kind of privileged status, and there is a sort of emulation that is done when the transformation takes place. So yes, I think that there is a sort of link between this representation of a French high society dame and the act of including the manners of this dame when we escalate the social ladders, actually, yes.
Well, and it has to do with fashion as well, right?
Yes.
Because she's supposed to be the French fashion woman. So,
Yes.
and some of those accents really are that strange thing in 1930s movies where American actors don't sound like any region of America.
Yeah.
That weird kind of Olivia Hamlin was, but you know that really strange, non-regionally specific, rich people accent that we saw.
It's
yeah.
the George Sanders school.
Exactly. Exactly. I had a question for Michael.
Okay.
Well, Michael, you were talking about this notion of the Jezebel trope. Did you have any sense of, and you talked about kind of the good intentions of the producers. Did they take that into account at all in the way that they, like, did they know?
Well, that's definitely the problem about the movie. It's because Kevin Greuter's movies are usually character-driven. So in specific interviews, he says that he makes a lot of research on specific psychological traits on his characters. And in Jezebel, well, if he's done the job, he probably did research on Jezebel, especially since the movie's title refers to the stereotype. So, so yeah, I believe that some work was done on that, and that it was completely dismissed when they filmed the movie.
I don't know, because I also think people use the word Lolita without caring what the book is about. Lolita means something different from the book, and has meant it since the day the book was printed. I mean, immediately. And so I think Jezebel is the same. It's the same phenomena. I'm not so sure that they did research, etc. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying people are using that word without caring very much for its history.
You mean Lolita doesn't mean abuse victim?
Lolita means someone who goes after older men. I mean,
Yeah.
we all
that
have
one
friends who call
leaves
their
me
kids
speechless.
Lola and Lolita. I mean, how can you do that? You know, it's. I don't tell them, you know, but I'm.
Too late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, about. Sorry. About the film you discussed, I was wondering if you. I thought about this idea of body snatching, etc. And there's the film Get Out as well. And I thought, did you compare the two, or are there, because Get Out was made by a black filmmaker, so that's a.
White people snatching black bodies.
Yeah. Well, I did not make the comparison for this talk because Jezebel was released in 2014, so I could not really
It's earlier, yes.
presume that the director was drawing on the popularity of Get Out. But it's definitely something I'm going to use in my research.
Amy?
I had a comment or question for Beth. You know that first scene you showed us when they're dragging the lady's body out and it leaves that blood trail behind? To me, this looks like menstrual blood. It looks like, well, it looks to me like a tampon being drug out across the floor, which would be linked to reproduction in this case. And I wondered if it's dead blood, but it's dead menstrual blood kind of, and I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, and there's there's a lot to be done in The Handmaid's Tale about sort of the color red and menstrual blood, and that is in fact, that's more telling than you know, and because that particular handmaid is pregnant. And the reason why the Martha is, or the Aunt Lydia is like, oh no, is, she's pregnant, and they actually, it gets worse, They keep her body, they literally keep her body alive throughout season 3 so that the baby can be born. And a lot of the season has to do with June, who as penance has to stay with of Matthew's inanimate body and sort of think about what she's done. And, it's supposed to be this kind of solidarity with him, but the body's just there. It's not even about her. It's all about how bad June feels or doesn't, or, so yeah, she does become this kind of embodiment, literal embodiment of the womb, of menstrual bleeding and completely divorced from any kind of humanity. So yeah, absolutely. And especially in that antiseptic kind of supermarket environment. Yeah.